Thank you. Thank you so much. Chair calls Jeffrey Clayton.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, pleasure to be here today. My name is Jeff Clayton, Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition, here in opposition to both bills, 1323 and 2020. Prior to 1987, nobody thought House Bill 1323 was constitutional because you couldn't preventatively detain people in this country. And when Thurgood Marshall dissented in U.S. v. Salerno, he said theirs is a decision that will go forth without authority and come back without respect. And boy, wasn't he right, because there was 24% pretrial detention rate in the federal system prior to the Federal Bail Reform Act of 1984, and we called over last week, and it's now 72.9% detained. And that's obvious. If you give the government the power to detain, what do you think they'll do? They will detain, because it's the safest way to go for a judge, which points out why bail is constitutional. Almost the exact same legislation has been proposed in many state houses in the last 10 years, and only two have bit. And that would be the states of New Jersey and partially, I would argue, the states of New Mexico. But last year, Idaho and Delaware rejected almost similar legislation to this. I stood shoulder to shoulder with 50 civil rights groups in California on this very same legislation, which they opposed, and unfortunately we could not stop. But then we raised $3 million to put it on a referendum and stopped it. So I would tell you that going to the federal system of risk-based preventative detention is the wrong policy for Texas. Don't change the framework on bail, and we can talk about which cases we don't need bail and all this sort of thing. To suggest that we're going to have a risk assessment free of bias would, in my mind, end all risk assessments in the United States of America, because I don't know how you prove that. And certainly there's only been a couple that have even attempted. One was the Arnold Foundation tool, but there's not even a common acceptance of which test to use. Do we use moderated regression? Do we use error rate balance? All this sort of thing. So I'm not sure that saying it's free of bias will leave anything left. To address 2020 real quick, 100 national civil rights groups opposed the expansion of pretrial risk assessments in the United States, including the NAACP and ACLU, largely due to concerns of validity and racial bias. Is this risk assessment here racially biased? I don't know, but you would probably want to find out if it makes the situation worse prior to making it state law. This legislation does not require transparency. I would direct you to Idaho House Bill 118 to allow the public to audit, test, and inspect a risk assessment. To say that we disclose the factors still means it's a black box, because we don't know how we got to the factors, and we can't check the math to get there. The other thing is allowing criminal defendants to challenge the results of a risk assessment in a criminal case is not permitted at this point. And what if a proprietary risk assessment is the decision, and then there's no ability for the criminal defendant to challenge it? The language in the bill says that we should not consider factors that disproportionately affect persons who are members of racial or ethnic minorities. Again, I think that's great, but how do you go there? Do you ban all demographic factors? Which factors can we use that are fair? And what if certain racial groups commit crimes at higher levels? Is that something that we would take out of this? Just this morning, Rice University issued a press release from Professor Robert Worth, and we want to talk about why are people in jail pretrial? Why are they there? Because they violated probation and parole. We didn't have probation and parole in this country prior to 1970, and that's the reason. It's the system of escalation of risk. They're more risky as time goes on, and we hammer them more. Risk responsivity principle. And he argues, and I agree, that the risk assessment methodology informs the system of mass incarceration that's been generational, and I think for that reason, I wouldn't go there. So thank you for your time.
Members, any questions? Thank you, Mr. Clayton.
Thank you.